welcome back to my lead guitar series, and I'm going to teach you something that I've been teaching to a lot of my private students lately. It's a variation of the spider I call the rock spider. So the regular spider kind of looks like this. You alternate pick, and there's a lot of details about how to practice scale technique. I've taught all this in another video, so I'm not going to go into the things of it there. I'm going to assume you know it already. So what you do is you start to learn to do this, making a wider, heavier pick stroke, kind of like this. It's almost like strumming. And as you do this, you learn how to mute strings around the one you're playing so that you could hypothetically hit all 6 strings and only hear one note. And on any set of strings you play, could hit everything and only hear the one string. And this is, I mean, almost anything that has the rock guitar sound is going to use this. The first song I learned this on was on Can't Stop by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. But I mean, this technique goes back to this really goes back to like the early bluesmen. I mean, Son House and Blind Lemon Jefferson and any of these guys would play with a very aggressive style. Whereas like eventually you have to learn how to do a lot of different types of muting to make it cleaner. It would start with the early bluesmen, and as this got into electric guitar, the technique for this got a lot more refined. So generally speaking, if you're playing rock guitar and you want a more energetic sound, if you don't want things to sound like all precious and stuff, you really want more of that bluesy sound, especially with a tube amplifier like I got here. You get a lot more out of the sound, a lot more energy if you learn how to really hit stuff and focus the sound just on the note you want, but be able to get that kind of raking, muting sound around it. So let's get into it a little bit. So again, I'm going to assume you already know the spider, but again, basically you're walking up things one fret at a time, and you already got to make sure you know how to connect the notes. An alternate pick and all that stuff. So the rock spider is really all about muting. It's about learning how to position your hands so if you hit a string that's not the one you are focusing on, you're not going to get a note out of it. So there's a couple of tricks to this. When we start on the bass string, it's pretty much all done by the left hand, or your fretting hand, whichever hand you fret with. So basically the essence is this position where your index finger sort of has this little hook, especially in this end joint, because that's what's going to push down the note. And instead of playing with the tip of your finger, you're going to play more with the pad. And what you'll notice, if I go into a profile here, what I'll do is have this very little, it's very small. It's a very small that pushes the note. And what that does is it looks like I'm barring, but I'm not. What I'm doing is I'm letting just this end of my finger hit just that note, and everything else is muted. And you'll notice it's a little risky in harmonic positions to get harmonics to come through. So sometimes I even bend my finger a little away from the harmonics. So even if I just go like, I'm more likely to get just this note, which is the one I want. And you can do this with any of the fingers, but usually it's just done with the index finger, and then the other fingers can kind of have their normal arches and do their thing. But you can usually get this position just with the one finger. It might take a little bit of time, but take a second to try to find that position with this first note. I'm on the 5th fret of the 6th string, and all I want you to do is try to find that very gentle arch that doesn't really bar the strings, but you have contact with all the treble strings, all the strings above your 6th string, and you can just whack. You can really just give everything a good whacking strum and get a very aggressive bass note in any direction. But not hear any of those notes. You don't want to hear, or you don't want to hear. Oftentimes people will bend just a little bit too much and hit this E string. You don't want anything else to come through. So try to find that angle. It's going to take some playing with, but this is really critical because everything else is built on this position. So try to find this position for yourself. And when you find it and you can get a good whack and just hear and sustain one note, you're ready for the next one. So one at a time, you're going to hit your first note, and then you're going to add the next finger, but every time you play, you're going to hit all 6 strings. And you're going to add another finger. Hit 6 strings, but hear one note. And you hear I even kind of moved over a little bit. I started to hear that harmonic a bit. So I got to look at the position of that muting finger. And And it's even safer if you can. Usually with these outer fingers, the index and the pinky can both mute. I mean, it depends on the position of the fingers. You can lay any finger down enough to mute in different situations. But in kind of my normal position, my pinky and my index can usually reach it, whereas these two fingers will want to be arched a little bit too much. Whereas you could use your whole hand as well. Like with the pinky down, you could just flatten all the fingers out. But then these fingers usually can't reach other notes. So usually I'll just use the pinky maybe as a backup. So right now my pinky and my index are laid down across everything. So even if I'm in a harmonic position, this pinky will stop that from coming through. So that can work too, to double up on fingers if you want to. There's different situations where you can do that. So here I've gotten through 4 fingers, no extra notes, no extra notes, no extra notes, no extra notes. Now I'm going to do my string crossing, and again, you have to make sure that the angle is such that you can get across this next string and keep your 6th string muted. Now this is where you start to add another muting technique. This is a second really important muting technique. This is probably the most critical one, is that you find a very specific position where the tip of your index finger is touching the side of the bass string next to the one you're playing. So if you're playing anything above the 6th string, you're going to use this. So again, you're playing sort of on the pad of your finger, so if you move the finger this way or this way, you can change the number of strings you're touching. So if I'm playing the 5th fret of the 5th string, what I can do is I can move my index finger just a little bit this way, so I'm touching the side of the 6th string. I'm not pushing it down, but I'm touching just the side of it. So you see the 6th string is being muted by the tip of my index finger, and I'm still using that little hook in that last joint to push down the 5th fret of the 6th string, or of the 5th string. But this 6th string is still muted by it. And also, this arch is still muting the other strings. So I can still mute all 5 strings other than the one I'm playing with one finger. And then the other fingers can stack normally because the index is kind of taking care of it. But that index stays in this position where it's muting one string to the bass side of where I'm playing, and then everything to the treble side. And if I go to the 4th string, it'll be kind of the same. I'm just still kind of moving it over just enough that I'm touching my A string, but I'm pressing a note on the D string. And you'll notice now, the 6th string, I can't touch it with my index finger anymore because it's just kind of getting in the way and trying to figure out a way to push that one note down on the D string. It's not really going to work. So there's 2 things I can do. If I'm playing on the D string, I can wrap my thumb around and touch the side of the 6th string with that. I don't really like that position because, as you see, it's kind of hard to hold. But it's doable. You can do that. That's not my preference, but you see it's a little bit mangly to find that position. Very possible to do. My preference is actually at this point to start bringing the wrist up on the right hand. So what you start to do is, rather if you're not playing too far back close to the bridge, then you won't get a palm mute with this way. If you're close to the bridge, you get a palm mute. But you bring the hand up a little more towards your sound hole or up on your pickups or closer to the fretboard. And then, once you start playing on your 4th string, my palm is touching the 6th string here. So it's muting the bass string, and maybe even the string below what I'm doing. But my 4th string is still really clear. So I'm going... And I'm maybe not raking all the strings. I could. But it starts to get kind of hard to do with this palm down here. Like on these 2 bass strings, you can usually thrash everything and get a big sound pretty easily. By the time you get more up to the treble strings, if you're bass muting, it's really hard because you don't have the range of motion. Unless you're doing a song where you're using multiple fingers, like on Can't Stop. You have a whole bunch of fingers stacked up. So you can still hit everything. But if you're playing single note leads, it gets a lot harder to do because you've got your palm kind of planted here on these bass strings. So you can rake through for maybe 1 or 2 notes of a solo. But it gets a little harder to do, so usually you're using a smaller range of motion. So what I focus on is I bring the palm up here to mute these bass strings, and then then I use this leaning over of my fingers to get the treble strings, and then I try to focus the arc of my stroke on the string I'm playing. So if I'm still playing the D string, I'm focusing on picking the D string, but I might even hit the 6th string, but it's muted by my palm. And then when I get to the G string, I creep up a little bit, and I creep up a little more, and by the time I get to the E string, I'm up here muting the G string with my palm and still using the tip of my index finger to get the string below what I'm playing. And that position sort of shifts around where you're choking in on both sides of what you're playing. And I mean, even when you get more advanced at this technique, you might get a couple of notes breaking through, but that's a little bit of the sound, so it's not the end of the world. Although over time you want to try to become more clean to be able to get bigger rakes and where you get through all the strings, but you only hear one note. And it's a tricky position because it's easy to kind of reach too far with the palm, or to just be a little bit too high with this, or just like push something too hard. So it's something you really take some time to refine the position for. It takes a little bit of time to get used to. Once you get used to it, though, it lets you play with a lot more power in rock music. It really defines the sound of things that are blues and rock influenced on the electric guitar. So again, it's really valuable to practice all the spider things that you've done, but with more of this kind of thrashing pick stroke. That's a little bit of what it will look like when you've worked on it a bit. But at first, it's going to be very slow where you're trying to find these 3 mute points of like the leaning of the finger, the tip of the index finger muting a bass string, and then the kind of creeping up of the palm, choking in from both sides. Like getting used to what the pick strokes feel like, getting used to what the different mutes feel like. It takes a little bit of time to get used to the position. So don't try to put in a ton of energy into the strokes at first. Although over time, you eventually want to be able to, be able to play stuff. Over time, it'll be able to be more energetic. Just give it time, finger yoga, find the positions, and it will really open up your rock playing a lot. So, yeah, I mean, that's my lesson for today. Send me some videos of how things go as you practice them. I'd love to see what's coming up. And, yeah, hope you found this lesson useful. See you in another one pretty soon. Bye-bye.